Some of the most famous serial killers rose to infamy due to their ability to hide from the police and the public in general. Centuries after he was active, we still talk about Jack the Ripper because of the mystery around his identity. Thankfully, this isn't usually the case, and police are able to track down some of the most dangerous criminals during or even after their crime spree. These are 5 serial killers from around the world and how they were caught. Number 5. Alexander Beechkov is believed to have killed between 9 and 11 people between 2009 and 2012. Beechkov was arrested in 2012 after he broke into a hardware store, stealing nearly $10,000 in goods, including 3 kitchen knives. Police at the time had no idea about the dark secret he'd been carrying for the past 3 years, bringing him in purely for theft. But in a search of his home, they found Beechkov's diary, where he wrote about killing and cannibalizing multiple people. Beechkov began his crimes in 2009. According to his diary, his girlfriend called him a wimp and a pushover. Beechkov vowed to prove he was a lone wolf, in his own words. On September 7th that year, he met 60-year-old Yevgeny Sidgov. When Yevgeny was drunk, Beechkov invited him back to his home, where he stabbed him to death and dismembered him. Beechkov later claimed to have cut out and eaten the man's heart before burying the body in the land behind his house. Beechkov mostly targeted men who were alcoholics or homeless, both because he disagreed with their way of life and because he thought they were easier targets. He lured them back to his home with the offer of a safe place to sleep before stabbing them or bludgeoning them to death. Beechkov was able to get away with his crimes for so long for a number of reasons. He made efforts to only kill in the summer months when migrant workers would be in the area. It worked as police initially suspected one of these seasonal workers was behind the crimes. At one point, another man was found guilty of 3 deaths, though his mother argued this was a miscarriage of justice. But Beechkov was aided by the apparent indifference of his neighbors. Many of the locals had seen Beechkov in bloodied clothing shortly after he'd taken another victim, but never thought to question what he'd been up to. However, not everybody ignored the signs. At least one person suspected Beechkov was behind the murders, but instead of going to the police, the unnamed individual confronted him and tried to blackmail him. Beechkov then killed him too. After he was arrested, he was deemed mentally ill but fit to stand trial. He was found guilty of 9 counts of murder, though he wrote about a further 2 victims in his diary. He's currently serving a life sentence. Number 4. The so-called son of Sam, David Berkowitz, went on a killing spree between 1976 and 1977. He killed 7 people and wounded 6 others and was caught due to a parking ticket. In late 1976 and early 77, 4 pairs of young people were attacked by a lone man none of them recognized. After the first attack, in which an 18-year-old woman died, it was thought to be a random crime and attracted little attention. But a second almost identical attack just a few months later suggested there was more to this case than a one-off attack. After the 4th attack, police were able to identify the gun of the killer using an uncommon .44 caliber Charter Arms Bulldog revolver. They determined this was the same gun used in the other attacks, confirming they were dealing with a serial killer. A handwritten note from the killer himself, found beside the bodies of 2 women killed in the 5th attack, gave him his most famous alias. He identified himself as the son of Sam and rambled about being a monster told to kill by his father Sam. The rantings indicated the killer was not of a sound mind, and psychiatrists believed the shooter might have had paranoid schizophrenia. The name Son of Sam stuck. He attacked 2 more times, but bad parking at the scene of his final crime would be his undoing. Cecilia Davis was walking her dog through the Bath Beach neighborhood when she spotted a traffic warden ticketing a parked car beside a fire hydrant. Shortly after, a strange man holding a dark object passed her from the direction of the car. He unnerved her and she rushed home. As she left, she heard shots fired. A young couple sitting in a nearby car had been shot 4 times. One died while the other suffered life-changing injuries. Cecilia contacted police, who were able to track down all the vehicles who'd received a parking ticket in that area at the time. The investigation led them to Berkowitz, who was already suspected by local police for another crime mentioned in the Son of Sam letters. Police confronted Berkowitz as he exited his apartment on August 10, 1977. He confessed to the killings and claimed his neighbor's dog instructed him to kill the young women, though he later declared this was a hoax. He was sentenced to 25 to life for each of the murders. Number 3. Apologies for what is most likely to be a horrible pronunciation, but a man named Basil is believed to have killed around 26 people between 1917 and 1935 in Romania. Given the time period, it's not surprising not much information about Basil is known, especially outside of Romania. He was known to have committed petty theft during the interwar period and was arrested in the 1930s for a string of robberies. Meanwhile, the building where he had previously lived was sold to a man with a dog. Immediately, the dog knew there was something hidden in the house. It seemed agitated and incessantly scratched at the door. The owner decided not to ignore his companion and dug into the floor of the building to find what the dog was upset by. He found 6 bodies buried less than a meter beneath the floorboards. All 6 victims appeared to have been killed by blunt force trauma, but a more thorough investigation found that they'd been attacked by a special axe similar to those used to cut large cattle. Basil was brought in for questioning. At first, he denied all knowledge of the bodies, but eventually confessed. He had lured his victims to his home before striking them with an axe. He'd ordered especially for that task. The axe was specially designed to not slip out of his hand during the attacks and made his blows even more effective. Once his victims were dead, he stole personal effects from their bodies, which he would later sell, then buried them beneath his home. Basil informed police he'd killed around 20 more people and offered to show them the site where they were buried. As he was reenacting one of his crimes, he tried to make an escape, but he was shot and killed before he could get away. More than 80 years later, Basil is believed to have been one of Romania's most prolific killers. Number 2. A woman by the name of Irina committed a series of brutal murders in order to steal money to buy alcohol. Irina's friends and neighbors thought the mother of 2 was a kind and gentle woman. She often helped out at her daughter's school, and nobody could believe she would ever hurt anyone. Those closest to her knew that she had a drinking problem, though. Her estranged husband refused to give her money, believing she would use it to buy alcohol. Irina didn't want to work, so she had to use other methods to get money to fund her drinking habit. In 2002, she began posing as a social worker to gain entrance into the homes of elderly women. She would stake out her targets, learning their routines, and searching out people who didn't get many visitors. Then she would knock on their doors and tell them she'd been sent to assist them. Irina came across as a professional, and her elderly victims trusted her. Once she gained access into their homes, she would beat her victims to death with a hammer or an axe. As they laid out on the floor, she would raid their homes in search of money. She stole between $25 and $400 from each victim, then tried to set fire to the homes to cover her tracks. Police initially believed only a man could be responsible for the murders. They couldn't imagine a woman doing something so cruel and violent. Even when witnesses described a suspicious blonde woman visiting the victims before their deaths, police believed the culprit could have been a man disguised as a woman. It was only after one of Irina's victims managed to survive the ordeal and insist the murderer was a woman that police believed a woman could be capable of the attacks. The investigation continued to struggle though. Police interviewed every blonde woman in the area and even considered using a psychic to help the investigation. At one point, an innocent woman was arrested and forced to confess, but the killings continued. The police's struggles built Irina's confidence, and she began to search for victims among the people she knew. She would also write notes for her victims, reminding them to be home for her visit. Her final victim, 81-year-old Alexandra, hired Irina as a decorator. Alexandra's neighbors spotted her leaving the flat and notified police after the elderly woman's body was found. With this, police were able to finally track down Irina. After being arrested, she confessed to 17 murders, giving details on each that weren't known to the public. She was sentenced to just 20 years in prison. Number 1. Niels Hogel is believed to be the most prolific killer in peacetime Germany. The nurse killed more than 80 people, though his total kill count could be more than 300. In 1999, he began his work at a hospital's cardiac surgery intensive care unit. Within a few years, doctors on the ward noticed an increase in the number of deaths and the number of patients who required resuscitation. The hospital held a meeting about the unusual deaths, and Hogel later admitted he believed he had been caught. Unfortunately, they hadn't made the connection between the increase of deaths while Hogel was on duty and he was able to continue his work. The increase in deaths followed Hogel as he moved units and hospitals. Many of his co-workers noticed these deaths always seemed to occur while Hogel was on duty, and at one point he was forced to resign from his position. But none seemed to believe the deaths were intentional, and Hogel was able to get work at another hospital shortly after. Finally, in 2005, he was caught red-handed. He was caught administering a large dose of heart medication to one of the patients, a man identified only as Dieter M. Shortly after, Dieter died and blood tests found that he had been overdosed with the cardiac agent. Hogel had intentionally killed him. Police were informed and Hogel was arrested. He was sentenced to just 5 years in prison for Dieter's death. At first, it was claimed this was a one-off occurrence, but further investigations revealed that this wasn't the case at all. Families of patients who had died under Hogel's care came forward with their suspicions, as did people who had worked with the nurse. There were countless stories of patients who had been stable one moment but required CPR from Hogel the next. He eventually admitted that he had purposefully been causing cardiac failures so that he could save the patients' lives. He wanted to play the hero, but in doing so, he likely killed hundreds. He's currently serving life in prison, while many of his colleagues have come under fire for their negligence. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.